Chapter 15 of Lady Jim of Curzon Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lady Jim of Curzon Street by Fergus Hume. Chapter 15. Monsieur Aksakoff owned a toy villa, pleasantly placed amongst orange groves and lemon gardens on the outskirts of Fool's Paradise. Hither, somewhere about the hour of 5, trooped a gay party, of which Katinka was not the least merry. So unaccountable were her spirits that the majority judged her to be what the Scotch aptly call fey. Lady Jim, in the minority, knew better. A recollection of the recent interview explained the girl's dancing on a possible grave. Leah had subjugated one of her own suspicious sex. This is a rare miracle. Rarer still, it had been achieved by truth-telling. Certainly, with inevitable female reservation, Lady Jim had not told the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But then her knowledge did not include the shibboleth of oath-taking. She did not love Demetrius. No avowal could have been more honest. Still, his medical acquirements had scarcely induced the flirtation which Katinka resented, and in saying so she swerved from the path of rectitude. Nevertheless, that ingenuous explanation of the illegal apron-string deceived Mademoiselle Aksakoff into believing that truth had really been dragged, unclothed and impeccable, from her well. The result may be guessed. From cold hostility, Katinka, ignorant of the golden mean, melted into warm friendship. The sadness of unrequited love was replaced by the allurements of hope, and the hitherto dreary, unpeopled world became an Arcadia of magical beauty, through which there ever moved a possible bridegroom. The colour returned to her wan cheeks, the light to her dark eyes, and in place of a listless nun, the astonished father beheld a dancing, laughing nymph. Clever as Aksakoff was, he failed to understand the why and the wherefore of this transformation. Being a diplomatist, he searched for the magician who had accomplished its wonders. Being mere man, he naturally espied the obvious. The unexpected presence of Demetrius, as he concluded, was responsible for the breathing of life into this statue. Lady Jim guessed his explanation, and was amused by his inquiring looks. She promised herself the pleasure of making things clear, in such a way as would compel confidences on his part. These might be useful in averting the wrath of Demetrius when he came to know that his reward was withheld. And Leah was not unreasonable in anticipating trouble of the worst, seeing that the doctor had already loaded her with a portion of a debt which she did not intend to pay. Garth was dead. That part of the task had been accomplished. Now Katinka informed her that Demetrius was bound for Jamaica. There he would arrange for the obliteration of Jim, and return with a substituted corpse to console the afflicted widow. The widow herself shivered at the prospect of being honest and tangibly grateful, and, since the possible was rapidly becoming the probable, began to consider means of evasion. But it was no easy matter to nullify the bond of a semi-oriental Shylock. With a diplomatist superadded to a father for an ally, and with tricky Muscovite politics to play with, Lady Jim fancied that her end might be obtained. But although she knew the goal, she could not see the most direct and least dangerous way to gain it. Her path was perplexing and perilous, so it was necessary to find a finger-post. She thought that Aksakoff might stand for such, since he would do much to neutralize the chance of his daughter's marriage with Demetrius. But to enlist him on her side and in her schemes required a private conference, and plainer speaking than Lady Jim approved of. However, as there was no opportunity of private speech for at least 1 hour, she had time to construct feasible plans. Meanwhile, her silence over the teacups was remarkable in so lively a lady. Certainly Garth might have died in the orthodox manner, as ample time had been given for his exit. On the other hand, Demetrius, eager for his reward, might have. But no, she could not bear to think of such a horror, and employed her will to deny the possibility. Nevertheless, strive as she would to banish the thought, it returned again and again, insistent and terrifying. No wonder Askew was moved to ask if she felt unwell, and no wonder she protested, with unnecessary emphasis, that she never felt better in her life. "I am gathering instruction from the conversation of others," she assured him, when he urged smelling salts. "But you are so extraordinarily pale." "I have parted with my colour to Mademoiselle Aksakoff. See, she blooms like an artificial rose." "Why artificial? Her bloom is natural." "And her spirits are forced. A hothouse is nature's corset." "I don't know what you mean," said Askew, bluntly. "You are a puzzle." "Which is as much as to say that I am a woman. I wish you would cease personalities and refill my glass." This sounded more bacchanalian than it was, for the glass contained nothing more destructive to the nerves than straw coloured tea, prepared milkless in the Russian manner, with plenty of sugar and a squeeze of lemon. Katinka presided over a samovar, and dispensed caviare sandwiches, so that the meal was entirely Muscovite. Aksakoff, stiff and pale and lean, precisely dressed, and watchful as a cat, paid diplomatic compliments to Lady Richardson, while Captain Lake laughed with Katinka. Miss Mulrady had annexed a flattering vicomte, who wanted money in exchange for a name which dated from the Crusades, and Askew hovered, like the silly moth he was, round Lady Jim's superfine wax candle. This possible tragedy of singed wings doubly and trebly assured Katinka of Leah's honesty, for who could love the demigod Demetrius and trifle with a nautical butterfly? Thus did she argue, crediting her once rival and now ally with the infatuation which in Fairyland made Titania clip Bottom in her arms. "The air of this place suits you," said Lake, wondering at this bubbling gaiety. "You were pale and sad when we last met, mademoiselle." "I may be the same when we meet again," she replied, refilling Lady Jim's glass. "What would you? Moods are agreeable." "Hum! I don't choose April as the most enjoyable month of the year." Katinka laughed meaningly, and glanced slyly at Lady Richardson. "I see you prefer an autumn month, highly coloured and mature." This was too symbolic for Lake, but some intuition of its meaning caused him to flush to the roots of his fair hair, and verbally deny comprehension. "I do not understand." "No gallant man would," she retorted, and further enlightened, the captain's pink became a violent crimson to the concern of its cause. "How red you are, Reggy!" cried Lady Richardson. "I hope it isn't scarlet fever." "I guess you suffer from that," murmured Mamie, posing her lorgnette. "Plaît-il?" inquired the bewildered vicomte, but received no reply. Miss Mulrady's knowledge of French was too limited to permit of pathological discussions. "Russian tea," explained Lake, cooling to his ordinary sunburn. "Why not one word? Indigestion." "Indigestion," repeated the soldier, with dry obedience. "You should really try Billy's new medicine. It has made him very fit. By the way, where is my darling?" Lake dodged the quizzical glance of Miss Mulrady, and explained that Sir Billy had been last seen wrinkling his young brows over the intricacies of Trente et Quarante. "Couldn't haul him off, but I daresay hunger will fetch him to the tea table." "Such devotion argues good luck," said Leah, wondering if Billy would arrive with full pockets. "Perhaps, Lady James. Most boys are lucky at play." "And therefore unlucky in love?" inquired Katinka, smiling. "Children should know nothing of such things," said Aksakoff, stiffly. "I guess not," cried Mamie. "But Sir Billy is a freak." "Really, Miss Mulrady," frowned the indignant little mother, "my son is not so eligible for Barnum's show as you seem to imagine. He hasn't got two heads, or an elastic skin, or any of those things which seem to be so popular in the United States. Wouldn't make him more interestin' if he had. He's a moral freak." "Et moi aussi?" asked the vicomte, whose scant knowledge of Americanese prevented entire understanding. "Oh, you haven't got morals of any sort." "Monsieur de Marville is the more interesting on that account," said Leah, rousing herself from a 2-minute silence. "A really good young man should be sealed as a boar in a glass case." "Then why is Mr. Askew at large?" The sailor laughed. "I fear my past can best answer that question." "By your tongue? Well?" "Better leave that well alone," laughed Katinka gaily. "Besides, only women have pasts." "And presents, when the men are generous," said Lady Jim. "I guess men are always generous when there's anythin' to be got." "After meals there is nothing to be got, save smoking," said the hostess. "You gentlemen have leave. Captain Lake, will you give me a cigarette?" Like many Russian ladies, Mademoiselle Aksakoff adored those fatal rolls of tobacco wrapped in coffee coloured paper, and consumed a great quantity. Lady Richardson, unlike the average Englishwoman, smoked likewise. That is, she fiddled qualmishly with half a cigarette, because it looked smart to do what you shouldn't. The gentlemen also offered incense to the very modern goddess Nicotine, and shortly Lady Jim was the only person present not committed to this agreeable vice. "I am behind the times," she confessed, "but please don't look upon me as a prude on the prowl. I willingly permit other women to spoil their teeth and ruin their digestions." "What a nasty speech!" cried Lady Richardson, offended, especially as Leah knew it was an effort for her to sin in this way. "My dear, it is. But then I feel nasty." "And look charming," whispered Askew. "I wonder how many times a day you repeat yourself," she replied impatiently. "As often as I recall your face. I can think then of only one adjective, charming, and one noun, angel." "What limitations! And the necessary verb?" "I love you." "First person singular, as usual, after the manner of the male egotist. Isn't this rather Lindley Murray whispering?" If it was, they had no opportunity of continuing it, for Lady Richardson drew Leah's attention to the fact that she had lost a fortune in the casino. "I depend upon you, dear, for my return fare." "Billy will pay," conjectured Lady Jim, calmly. "I quite expect he has broken the bank." "Not on Mr. Askew's system," cried Mamie. "You couldn't run an apple stall on his lines." "You would suggest improvements," complained Askew, reproachfully. "Then you admit that they were." It fitted properly into the puzzle, and at the proper time. But it's a mistake to swap horses when crossing a stream. "Huh!" said Miss Mulrady, in her best Californian style. "I guess the animals belong to you. I lost no dollars"; and with a comfortable sense of her own cuteness, she accepted a cigarette from the attentive vicomte. This frothy chatter irritated a lady who was inwardly grappling with problems of the near future. Askew ventured on more spindrift, only to be snubbed into seeking the complacent society of Mamie. This necessitated a game of general post, for Katinka slipped in rapid French and boulevard gossip with de Marville, while Lady Richardson drew Lake once more to her elderly feet. Remained the diplomatist in splendid isolation, and his gaze wandered to Lady Jim, who stared straight before her. She was looking into the next world, where a reproachful ghost, something resembling Jim, was asking why he had been butchered to make a woman's holiday, and the living, half believing the terrible truth implied, gave shuffling answer to the dead, "Demetrius is to blame." So vivid was the vision, so powerful the thought, so guilty the conscience, that her tongue actually framed this much aloud, before she became aware that her secret was slipping out. A hasty glance around assured her that none of the prattlers had overheard, but an echo of the name at her elbow testified to Monsieur Aksakoff's excellent hearing. Lady Jim grew chill. What had she said? How much had he gathered? Instinctively facing a possible danger, she did not even turn her head or raise her voice, but almost in the same breath concluded the sentence differently. "If he does not cure Jim." "Your husband?" asked the diplomatist, politely. With admirable skill Leah started, as though her reflections had been unexpectedly interrupted. "You there, Monsieur Aksakoff? I was thinking of my husband. Yes, he is trying to get well in Jamaica, and Monsieur Demetrius has gone to pull him round. I shall certainly blame him if he does not cure Jim." "That is severe, madam. After all, no human being holds the keys of life and death." Self-controlled as she was, Lady Jim shuddered. Demetrius certainly held the key of death, and had used it, for so she began to believe, in opening for Garth a door into the unknown. However, she utilised the shudder very dexterously. "Don't talk like that. It makes me fear lest Jim should never get well. But, after all, M. Demetrius is extraordinarily clever. I told your daughter only this afternoon how I had been attracted to him for Jim's sake, and by his knowledge of consumption." "Oh!" Aksakoff looked at her with his pale eyes, and very inquiringly. It had not occurred to him that the lady was a model wife. "The medical attainments of M. Demetrius attracted you?" "Naturally. My husband is ill. I wish him to be cured. M. Demetrius has a European reputation for cure of consumption. We have held many conversations on the subject, and I feel certain that there is a chance for poor dear Jim." "If M. Demetrius becomes his medical attendant?" "He is," Leah assured him. "The poor creature he was looking after in Madeira on behalf of the Duke is dead, and Katinka informed me that M. Demetrius had sailed for Jamaica." Aksakoff frowned. "How does my daughter know that?" Lady Jim rose to shrug her shoulders, and to seize the opportunity thus offered to solve her problem by means of a private conversation. "A charming place you have here," she said, glancing round, and giving him to understand that the shrug was his answer. "The air is so balmy." "You will find it more so without tobacco smoke," said the Russian, throwing away his cigarette, and, without knowing it, was thus skilfully entrapped into a dialogue by an ostensibly reluctant woman. "I am so comfortable here," urged Leah, with feigned hesitation. "So pleased, madame. But your sense of the picturesque will make you sacrifice ease for a particularly charming view of the Estrelle." "The proper study of womankind is man," misquoted Lady Jim, accepting the invitation. "But nature comes as a relief at times. We see so little of her in society," and she glanced at Lady Richardson's dyed hair and tinted cheeks. "You are severe, madame." "I shall begin to believe so, if you repeat that a third time," she replied, smiling and glancing sideways at his face. This she did to discover, if possible, his intentions. It suddenly occurred to her that the diplomatist's insistence meant intrigue on his part. He, like herself, was playing a game, and Lady Jim, for the sake of the result, wished to overlook his hand. Had she seen it, which she did not, the knowledge that people knew more about her domestic affairs than she would have approved of might have shocked her. Ivan Aksakoff was not a tricky Russian, nor a diplomatist of repute for nothing. Instructions had reached him several times from headquarters that Demetrius was to be watched while in England, and, if possible, decoyed into the territory of a less scrupulous nation for the purpose of arrest. A drugged official's feelings had been outraged, a much wanted anarchist had escaped through the connivance of the exile, and a paternal government thought that an enforced trip to Siberia might cool misplaced friendships for suspected persons. Several times Aksakoff had tried to induce the Demetrius opossum to climb down from his tree of refuge, but the suspicious beast refused to oblige him. Therefore all that the diplomatist could do was to keep himself advised of the doctor's doings, in the hope of luring him to destruction when he was off his guard. He had biblical precedent for this hope. Shimei, the son of Jerah, lulled by long security, had crossed the forbidden brook Kidron, so why should not Demetrius, likewise forgetful, cross the Channel? Stealthy inquiry into the doctor's affairs had led Aksakoff to ask himself why the man dangled at Lady Jim's apron strings. Reports poured in, fast and thick, that the Curzon Street household was insolvent, but these did not help the diplomatist overmuch. If Lady Jim wanted money, she would scarcely ask a penniless exile for the cash he did not possess. The man was not sufficiently handsome, nor so superlatively fascinating that he should gain the love of the most beautiful woman in London. And incidentally Aksakoff learned that Lady Jim was a modern Lucrece, although she did not profess an ardent love for her lord and master. Therefore, as neither Mammon nor Cupid could explain a friendship which was pretty freely discussed in clubs and drawing rooms, Aksakoff could not comprehend this particular wile of woman. In his endeavour to fathom the meaning, he even went so far as to question his daughter, knowing that she was as infatuated with Demetrius as Demetrius was with Lady Kaimes. But Katinka either could not or would not explain, and for months the diplomatist had been exasperated by the sight of a genuinely platonic friendship, for which there seemed to be no reason. Now he learned from one of the parties to the bond that a husband's sickness and a friend's skill were the elements which composed the intimacy. Such a case in such a light had never before been presented to him, and while sauntering by Lady Jim's side to view the Estrelles against the sunset, he was trying to think if the explanation was genuine. To his acute hearing it did not sound even plausible. Nevertheless, and this was Aksakoff's reason for seeking the interview, some use might be made of the woman to entrap the man. Lady Jim was badly in need of ready money, and the Russian government had at the time full coffers. Since there was no love in the question, the singular lady might, for a round sum, dispense with the doctor's attendance on her husband. More, if delicately handled, she might induce Demetrius to show her the sights of Paris. It was difficult to hint this without shocking the feelings of a great lady and a spotless woman. Still, if skilfully done, and without too much emphasis, Lady Jim might gather that her finances could be put in order without much trouble on her part. But Aksakoff had another argument, which induced him to risk a scene with outraged virtue. He loved his daughter, and wished her to marry a highly placed cousin, who would be of political use to his father-in-law. Unfortunately, Katinka was infatuated. Aksakoff could find no more appropriate word with Demetrius. Marriage with a person wanted by the powerful of St. Petersburg meant a check to the diplomatist and a handle to his many enemies. The match was not to be thought of. Yet if Demetrius would only prove kind, Mademoiselle Aksakoff would assuredly become his wife, even if she had to achieve the marriage by elopement. Also, Katinka might be able to procure the man's pardon, and of this Aksakoff entirely disapproved. Even if the doctor was whitewashed, he had such socialistic or anarchistic feelings, it mattered not which, that he would never consent to resume his title or the large income attached to such resumption. On the whole, both from a fatherly and a domestic point of view, Aksakoff felt that this marplot would be safer in a Siberian mine. How to get him there was the problem. The solution might come through Lady Jim. If he could only ascertain her feelings towards Demetrius, and hint that such a lovely woman should not be worried by sordid money affairs, it was not improbable that such a satisfactory result would be arrived at. It was a forlorn hope, but Aksakoff dared it. It was a straw, but he grasped at it, and now fully committed to the speculation, he was casting about in his mind as to a promising beginning. No easy task, for Aksakoff's spies and Aksakoff's experience assured him that Lady James Kaimes was a prickly plant, needing care in the handling. So it will be seen that Leah's intuition had not deceived her, scanty as was the ground for suspicion. The closer she examined his face by swift side glances, the more certain she became that he was playing a game, and from her experience of diplomatists, by no means for love. To vary the metaphor, she and the Russian were about to engage in a duel, either with foils or swords. Lady Jim did not care which. She was perfectly assured that, however dexterous her antagonist might be, she could fence quite as well, if not better. And thus she marched to the duelling ground, already a victor. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Lady Jim of Curzon Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lady Jim of Curzon Street by Fergus Hume. Chapter 16. Silhouetted against a pale purple sky, the dark masses of the Estrels floated on a shimmering sea. Nearer and clearer, yet less sharply defined, etherealized by amethystine hues and indistinct through the haze of gloaming, frowned the Grimaldi stronghold, its mouldering walls clasping closely packed houses dominated by a lean and soaring campanile. Over the cactus hedge and between bending palms could be caught a glimpse of the trim, unromantic modern town, of the sleepy waters of the bay, and fishing boats rocking beside spick-and-span toy yachts, with here and there the picturesque felucca of Mediterranean commerce, old-fashioned, with oars and lateen sails. Only Shelley, in radiant verse, could have described with any approach to truth this magical dreamland, real yet unreal, under the changing colours of sunset. As at the outset of an earlier and less difficult interview, Lady Jim admired the loveliness of paradise with ostentatious disregard of her embarrassed companion. And embarrassed he was to such a degree that she marvelled at his choice of a profession in which emotions count as crimes. This judgment was unfair, for Aksakoff ordinarily commanded his feelings with the severity of a martinet. But so great were the stakes for which he proposed to play, his daughter's future and his political advancement, that he shifted uneasily from one foot to the other, clasped and unclasped his hands, and betrayed more of the natural man and anxious father than was consistent with diplomatic reticence. Having some idea of this mental confusion, Leah waited for him to make an almost certain mistake, of which she intended to take full advantage. She was like a cat watching a mouse hole, ready to pounce at an opportune moment. Meanwhile she held her tongue, which sufficiently assured Aksakoff of her dangerous capability. He had never before beheld the ominous miracle of a silent woman, and his nerves were none the better for this surprising spectacle. "Demetrius, madame," he finally blundered, and recognized the blunder as the words left his mouth. "Demetrius is your friend." The attack was so weak that Lady Jim contemptuously gave him vantage ground. "Katinka's lover also, I understand." "And the Czar's enemy," retorted Aksakoff angrily. "Let us have all his qualifications at once, madame." "By all means. Enemy, friend, lover. Well?" "It is very far from well. As you know, madame, I desire no Siberian felon for my son-in-law." "I never knew that Monsieur Demetrius had been to Siberia." "He will go there yet, to his grave." "What an odd choice of a cemetery," said Leah, shrugging. "But I assure you, Monsieur Aksakoff, that I take no interest in these funeral arrangements." "No, yet report says " He was about to blurt out something still more undiplomatic, but that Lady Jim's pity for his ineptitude made her intervene. "I know what it says, and of course I deeply sympathize with you." "Madame!" "Yes, yes, I comprehend your feelings. It is hard that your own daughter should defy you, especially as M. Demetrius is merely a doctor." "He is a prince in our country," said Aksakoff, furious that she should take the lead, and at a loss how to regain it. "A felon also, I understand you to say." "Let him venture on French soil, and I shall certainly make him one," snarled Aksakoff, with unpleasantly glittering eyes. Lady Jim had scratched him rather dexterously, and the Tartar stood revealed. She scratched again. "Even if Katinka makes him your son-in-law?" "That shall never be." He hesitated, then attempted a bear hug. "I will speak plainly, madame." "About Katinka and her infatuation? Oh, certainly." Aksakoff bit his lip. Used as he was to verbal fencing, Leah's handling of her tongue baffled him. He took refuge in truth-telling. "Demetrius does not love my daughter," he said bluntly. "How fortunate for you, and disagreeable for her." "He loves an actress," explained Aksakoff, wondering if her interest in the man deepened to jealousy. Apparently it did not. "That would interest Katinka more than it does me," she assured him; then, affecting the innocence of ignorance, "May I ask why you chronicle small beer?" "Demetrius is your intimate friend." "My husband's medical attendant," she corrected quietly. "If you remove him to that distance, I confess to an indiscretion. Shall we return?" "Without admiring the Estrelles?" "Madame, the excuse was obvious." "For what?" Aksakoff shrugged his shoulders. "For the clearing up of misunderstandings. You are anxious, so you say, that Demetrius should cure your husband. My reason for this conversation is to apologize for my intention to rob you of his very valuable services. If I can trap Demetrius, say in Paris, Lord James must content himself with an inferior doctor." Leah looked pensive and puzzled. "I comprehend, but why should you make use of the wrong word?" "Misunderstanding?" Then, when she nodded, "My ignorance of your language." "Or of my feelings? By this talk of Parisian traps and Siberian punishment, you assume that I am acquainted with the private affairs of M. Demetrius." "It is possible that I have made that mistake," said Aksakoff, dryly. "As a diplomatist, you should never confess as much. It might be that I may take advantage of your mistake to inform M. Demetrius of his danger." "I foresaw that possibility, madame. As a dutiful wife, you naturally wish to keep so clever a doctor in attendance on your husband." "Of course. But a trip to Siberia would not improve Jim's health." "There is no need for the mountain to go to Mahomet, madame." "Pardon me if in this case I think otherwise." Aksakoff shrugged again. "I admit the reason, seeing that this particular mountain is married." "These parables are a trifle wearisome, Monsieur Aksakoff. The air is chilly, and I wish to return to Lady Richardson. Would you mind telling me plainly, before we part, why you sought this interview?" "Assuredly, madame. My daughter loves this man, who does not love her, and who, by reason of his crime and opinions, is not an eligible husband. You were with Katinka this afternoon, as you informed me, and she is now so cheerful that I suspect you must have delivered some message from Demetrius to so raise her spirits. Or it might be," he looked squarely at her as he added, "that Demetrius is in Monte Carlo." "No, your daughter had a letter from him in which he stated that he was leaving Madeira for Jamaica. Go on, please." "Katinka had a letter?" said Aksakoff, with an unpleasant look. "That no doubt accounts for her spirits. Were you Cupid's messenger, madame?" Lady Jim smothered a laugh. "No, though I admit that I should like to see her happy." She will never be happy with a man who does not love her. Demetrius will not come near me, and I cannot explain. Will you oblige me by taking a message?" "Why should I?" "For the sake of retaining him as Lord James's medical attendant." Leah nodded. "As a wife, I will take your message. What is it?" "Tell Demetrius that if he will give Katinka to understand that he will never marry her, my gratitude will be stronger than my duty." "In other words, you will not arrest him?" "So long as he remains in England." "Where he can't be arrested," laughed Lady Jim. "Well, your message shall be duly delivered, and I may as well confess, since we are committed to plain speaking, that M. Demetrius informed me why he had to leave Russia." "His confidence will render it easier for you to make a treaty between us, madame." "Possibly; but you will understand that I assume the role of peacemaker solely on my husband's account." "Madame," Aksakoff bent and raised her hand to kiss it. "As a wife you are far above rubies. Shall we return?" Leah consented without moving. She had not yet solved her problem. "One moment. You will give me your word that M. Demetrius will not be lured to Paris?" "I give you my word. If the treaty is made, and Katinka is disabused of her infatuation." "Which forms part of the treaty," said Leah, lightly. "In the interests of Jim, I'll do my best. But should he go to Paris " "He will assuredly leave it for Siberia, which is much colder and not so amusing." "Then I must advise him to be naturalised in England." "It will be the act of a friend, madame. And also you might advise him to beware of this actress." "Oh, I can't intrude my advice into his strictly private affairs." "If you wish your husband to be cured, it will be as well to do so," Aksakoff recommended. "Mademoiselle Ninette is not to be trusted." "Ninette? I have seen her. A very charming artiste, but unscrupulous." "Not so much so, I hope, as to betray the man she loves." "A woman, madame, will do much for money." "How well you know the sex, monsieur!" said Lady Jim, ironically. "I have had some experience, madame." "And have benefited so little that you cannot manage your daughter without my intervention." "I confess it. Let me amend my statement by saying that I have had many experiences and little experience." "That is a more correct way of putting it," said Leah, gravely, "for I assure you, Monsieur Aksakoff, that if a woman loves a man, she certainly will not betray him for money." "We join issue, madame. The Uranian Aphrodite is not the divinity in this case, and Aphrodite Pandemus can be bought." "How classical and confusing! And the price?" £2,000, said Aksakoff, carelessly. "You should reckon it in francs, seeing that Mademoiselle Ninette is French. Otherwise she will not understand." "The jingle of gold is a universal language, madame." "An agreeable one, at all events. I wish we had more opportunity of studying it." "Well, Monsieur Aksakoff, for Jim's sake, I shall see that M. Demetrius affords this harpy no opportunity of earning the money." "And you will pardon my mentioning the harpy's name?" "We are a man and woman of the world, Monsieur Aksakoff. There is no need to call spades shovels. I thank you for considering my husband. To lose the skill of M. Demetrius might result in his death." "I am happy to have been of service to you, madame, and of course you can understand my paternal feelings." "Assuredly. I shall do my best to make your daughter see reason. A woman can talk to a woman of such things, you know." "When she is such a woman as you, madame," said Aksakoff, again bending over her hand. "And now just 1 hour to catch the train," remarked Leah, with a glance at the tiny watch set in her bracelet. In this way Leah solved her problem, and Aksakoff gained his point. Yet on the face of it their conversation dealt entirely with the saving of Demetrius from a Siberian prison, and Katinka's matrimonial salvation. But Lady Jim knew that, if she could lure the doctor to Paris, she would no longer need to fear a Sabine alliance, while the diplomatist was satisfied that for £2,000 Demetrius would be safely transported to Siberia. Leah, guessing this, let him think that the money tempted her, though she wondered how he came to know that she needed cash, and was secretly angered that he should dare to offer a bribe. But she could not confess her true reason for wishing the exile of Demetrius without letting Aksakoff know about the plot. Therefore, of the two evils she chose the less. But she resolved to take no Russian gold. This cynical foreigner should learn that a strictly virtuous Englishwoman cannot be bought. It was commendable in these augurs that they did not wink at one another. Their reappearance at the tea-table was greeted with shrieks of joy from Lady Richardson, whose emotions were invariably noisy. "Leah, Leah!" she cried, overcome by maternal love and pride, "Billy has won you 12,000 francs." 12,500, corrected Sir Billy, who was disposing of tea and cake and sandwiches in a way which argued long abstinence. £500, translated Captain Lake. "Oh, you dear, clever boy," said Lady Jim, coming rapidly to the table to kiss her cat's paw. "Halves, of course." Sir Billy shook his head, and tried to keep cool, for the kiss rather upset his dignity. "I am more than repaid," said he gallantly. "So I should think," murmured Askew, who would have doubled the amount for a similar attention. Mamie overheard, and recalled a phrase she had never used before, but which suited her impersonation of the American girl as she is not. "Don't put the banana peel under your own foot, sonny." "What do you mean?" asked the mystified islander. Miss Mulrady glanced at Lady Jim's back, then winked at Askew to intimate that she had remarkably good eyesight; also that kissing married women led to D.C. cross-examinations; also but there was no end to the many meanings of that wink. Lord Burleigh's headshake in The Critic, Act II, Scene 1, could not have been more eloquent. Meanwhile applausive adjectives buzzed round Billy's head. He fought his trente et quarante battle o'er again between hasty mouthfuls, while his mother, thanking Providence for having bestowed on her such a son, murmured ecstatic asides to Katinka Aksakoff. It was the apotheosis of the modern child. Leah counted her gains, placed them safely in one of those wonderful feminine pockets unknown to man, then gave a passing thought to the virtuous Hengists. "We must get back, dear," she warned Lady Richardson. "Katinka, darling," this was for Aksakoff's benefit, "do come over and see me. We have so much to talk about." "I shall be delighted," replied the girl, flushing with joy, and really was so. The prospect of unlimited conversations on the subject of demigods and their ways with a sympathetic friend allured her towards an hour of happiness. What was left of Lady Jim's conscience smote her. She felt almost sorry for her dupe. But, with the premeditated self-deception of people who rearrange Biblical texts for the palliation of pet sins, she reflected that a fool's paradise for Katinka was better than no paradise whatsoever. Monsieur Aksakoff said no more. He and Lady Jim understood one another perfectly, and it was useless to add touches to a finished picture. With cordial stiffness he sped his guests on their way through the town and the glare of the electrics down to the station lift. Mamie and her supple vicomte shook hands midway, but Askew and Captain Lake insisted upon seeing the ladies safely into a comfortable compartment. Billy was disgusted. "One man's enough to run this show," protested Billy. "Don't talk American slang," rebuked his mother, and pelted the men with breathless adieux. "Good night, Reggy. So very charming, our day. Mr. Askew, good night. So very charming. We've had a ripping time." "And the mother kettle calls my pot black," Billy breathed to Leah. She paid no attention. Askew was trying to extort an invitation to San Remo with eloquent eyes and persuasive lips, but a recollection of his 24 hours in the vicinity without calling added to a resentment that he should have experimented with his system in the unauthorised company of a much too attractive girl, made her ignore his hints. Moreover, being an ex-sailor and undiplomatic, he would probably prove so affectionately honest that the Hengists might, and if the Hengists did, then adieu grapes, the vintage is over. Julia and her serious spouse would never understand the need of a grass widow for amusements of this sort. While her Ulysses wandered, they expected her to be a replica of Penelope, that dull woman who was so fond of speeches and sewing. "Come to Curzon Street in a fortnight," she advised, and the train departed, leaving him to muse on the ars amatoria, as understood in the Navy. "I hope you have enjoyed yourself, dear," said Lady Richardson, arranging Billy's tie and kissing Billy's nose, but addressing Leah. "I'm sure you ought to have. This darling has won you pots." Lady Jim nodded, rather wearily. The cackle of the hen over her chick worried her, and she retreated to the most distant corner, bored by maternal fussiness. This visit had taken her a step farther, but it was most annoying that success should make her feel uncomfortable. Aksakoff, misapprehending her reasons as he did, would certainly assist her materially, but Katinka, brrr! Why couldn't conscience quit worrying? End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Lady Jim of Curzon Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lady Jim of Curzon Street by Fergus Hume. Chapter 17. Even the skilful find it no easy matter to drive a kicking, squealing team. The off-horse must be flicked into decorum, the near leader soothed, the wheelers, bearing the heat and burden of the day, encouraged into pulling with a will. Then a deft hand on tugging reins, a quick eye for the deviations of the road, some knowledge of mouths, tender and hard, and manifestations of that will which makes of vehicle and quadrupeds a coherent whole. These things must be attributes of the God in the car, likewise of the Dea ex machina, although Lady Jim was in and not out of the vehicle. Enthroned with whip and ribbons, she drove a team of 5, and in the odd number lay the difficulty of bringing the car of destiny to the selected stables. For by this time, rejecting an overruling providence other than the fetish, who was a domestic god and biased, Leah looked upon herself as her own omnipotent and triumphing destiny. She would, so she decided, expunge Jim, utilize Askew and Katinka, obliterate Demetrius, and assist Muscovite politics through Aksakoff. This team in harness and rendered obedient by blinkers she controlled with considerable judgment and made single-hearted for her goal. That the actual destiny whose role she affected to play might upset her smoothly running chariot by a judiciously placed and unlooked-for stone, she never paused to consider. So far as she could see, the course was clear to the prize, a money-bag, which she would seize as a victorious widow of the wrong sort. Askew was the odd animal of the team, the fifth wheel on her chariot, though he was less like a horse than a troublesome and over-faithful dog. Notwithstanding her prohibition, he invaded San Remo, played a most exasperating patience on a monument along the promenade, and dodged her angry eyes round convenient street corners. She could not go abroad but what he turned up in unexpected quarters, nor could she remain at home without his appearing to excuse on frivolous pretexts a wholly unnecessary visit. Luckily, the Hengists approved of his frank looks and modest manners, else she might have been compromised. Even in easy-going Italy, such Sisypheism was annoying. Later, Lady Jim returned to London for that season invented by man, and left him to kick his heels in cross isolation. But even before the Curzon Street house could be warmed, he rang the bell, and presented himself in the character of a martyr. For the sake of the future, Leah kept him in the team, but she gave him more of the whip than he liked, and also, ironically, a marked almanac limiting his visits. But that she had some liking for him, and much use, she would have bundled him into the arms of the fixture, with strict orders to give those same arms a legal right to embrace him for ever. But Askew himself put an end to that chance of being safely bestowed. "What will Marjory say if you make my house your hotel?" she asked, when he appeared on the 5th day of the week for the 8th time, and at afternoon tea, too, when she, with a hard day's pleasure behind her, was recruiting for the night's fatigue. "Nothing," he asserted, sulkily and guiltily. "She has no right to control my actions." "That depends upon your feelings towards your future wife." "She is not we have broken it off." "What?" Lady Jim was frankly exasperated. She, as a married woman, and he, as an engaged man, could platonize to any extent, but he free, and she shortly to be a widow. What then? She would no more make him her husband than she would allow Demetrius to lead her to the altar, and here he was, selfishly placing himself in an eligible position for the very matrimony she declined to contemplate. "Marjory and I decided we were not suited," he explained, but timidly, because her eyes flashed. "She takes half the income and marries that fox-hunting ass. I'm free with the rest of the money." He waited for congratulations, which never came. "I thought you would be pleased," he blundered. "And pray why should I be pleased?" I fancied you liked me," he stuttered, growing red. "Tolerably, as an engaged man." "Then you've been playing with me," he cried. "You don't love me." "Did I ever tell you so?" "No, but I thought " "Your vanity thought. Go on." "Oh, Leah." "Kaimes, which is my married name." Askew gasped. Her amazing impudence reduced him to staring silence. She had lured him to her feet with sweet looks and significant smiles and cooing words, till he had been deceived into thinking that her passion was as strong and as true as his own. Now she reminded him that she was married. "Oh!" he gasped again, and Lady Jim laughed shortly. Her cat nature was enjoying this mouse play. Visitors had come and gone, and they were alone in the dainty drawing-room with an untidy tea-table. Askew, having escorted her home from Ranelagh, had waited for an hour with stubborn patience for this solitude of two. His end had been gained, and now
He looked helplessly round, as though seeking for some third person to explain if his charmer were a demon or a woman. "Oh!" he said once more. "Nearly 6," said Leah, consulting her bracelet. "How long do you intend to stay there saying 'oh'?" And she mimicked him. "Leah, Lady James Kaimes." "Not even Lady Jim," he said, clenching his brown hands. "Oh, you " His voice became inarticulate with sheer anger. "Pray consider that you are in my house," she reminded him coldly. "I'll never come here again." "That is as you choose." "But I can't live without you." "How flattering! And I won't." He came a step nearer the low chair in which she sat, but her derisive laugh made him pause. "Leah, I love you." His voice broke, and he stretched out his arms. "I saw that ages ago." "Then why did you He stopped and looked at her with imploring eyes. "I thought you loved me," he murmured, choking. "Oh, you thought!" said she ironically. "Is it not true? Have I been deceived?" "No!" He flung out a beseeching hand. "Don't speak. I cannot bear to hear the truth. Let me go. Let me go." He stumbled towards the door blindly. "You have broken my heart, but I'll go away, far away, to South America, and oh, my God!" He leaned against the wall and covered his face with his hands. Lady Jim might have been in the stalls of a theatre for all the personal feeling she had hitherto shown, but his last words brought self uppermost. If he went to South America, he would certainly see Lola Fajardo, and possibly might come face to face with Jim. Recognition of an admitted corpse would spoil Jim's game and her own. Askew, for she put herself in his place, would certainly make things unpleasant, and she did not wish to provide a scandal in high life for circulating extra editions of newspapers during the silly season. Besides, he was really a nice boy, and she would miss his good looks and canine attentions. Both circumstances and inclinations demanded that she should keep him under her eye. An explanation came to her while he sobbed at the door, looking very ridiculous, she thought, and she made use of it to soothe his sorrow and save herself. "You silly boy," she began, and the beginning produced an effect she was far from foreseeing. "Silly? Yes, I am silly," he admitted between his teeth, and flinging back his head to regard her with fierce, wet eyes. "I am silly to have believed in you and in your false affection." Before she could protest against this language, she had risen to do so. He hurled himself across the room and gripped her wrist so tightly that she could have screamed with pain. "You shan't treat me in this way. Do you hear? You shan't. I'm not going to be whistled to your feet like a dog and then kicked aside. Married? Yes, you are married as you were when you whistled. But hang your husband and damn your husband. He has no claim on you other than a legal one. Mine you are, and mine you shall be. I tell you, Leah," he shook her in his anger, "that you must leave this man and come with me. You must, you must." He dragged her hands to his breast. "You shall." "Harry!" she gasped his name in sheer surprise. "Yes, Harry, the fool, if you will, the man, as you shall find." "How dare you?" "Because I do dare, and I shall dare more if you play football with my heart. Why couldn't you leave me alone? Why couldn't you stick to the man whose name you bear? Don't struggle, for you shan't be free till I have had my say out. You made me love you. Now I shall make you love me. You and your society rubbish and gimcrack rules and polite lies and make-believe of truth. You with He shook her again. "You over-civilized coquette. You Circe of many wiles. You ruin of honest men. Do you think that I, who am flesh and blood, care for your lady and gentleman humbug? No, no. I am a man, you a woman, and we are one. You hear? One. If not, I'll put a bullet in your head and another through my own. You have fooled many. You shan't fool me. There!" He flung her roughly from him. "Now you can ring for your servants to put me to the door." With bruised wrists and wide open eyes, Leah stood dumbfoundered. Jim at his worst had never been like this. If he had been, she would have truly loved him. At the moment she very nearly loved Askew, recognizing in his outburst that masterful nature which every woman adores and succumbs to. In spite of her dexterity in playing with amorous fire, it really seemed as though she was burning her fingers on this occasion. Naturally, she enjoyed the experience. This reversion to cave life thrilled her pulses. Had Leah been capable of loving anything with a beard, she would have then and there fallen at Askew's feet and implored him to trample on her. But her absolute ignorance of the strongest of passions, save self-love, snatched the victory in what would have been to an ordinary woman the hour of defeat. "Well," she said, admiration struggling with anger, "you are a brute." The man, still panting from conflicting passions, acted strangely and foolishly, as men do at crucial moments. He smoothed his hair, arranged his tie, and pulled down his waistcoat, not looking at her, but into a near mirror. Yet he saw her astonished face at second hand, and smiled grimly. "I can be a brute," said he, ominously quiet, "but you haven't seen me at my worst yet." Good heavens! This was undoubtedly a man, the dominating male, the genuine lord of creation, whose animal honesty can rend the cobweb entanglements of the female sex, and does rend them when the bandage of love inopportunely slips. Defiance would not lure him again to his proper position at her feet, and she was half afraid of the might her trickiness had evoked. But in woman's weakness lies woman's strength, and Delilah pulled down the corners of her mouth to subjugate Samson. "My poor wrists," she murmured. Askew wheeled from the mirror, shied and winced, but his mouth and eyebrows were still three straight lines. "My poor wrists," reiterated the temptress, moving towards her prehistoric man. "See, you have bruised them." He could see that he had. They were under his eyes, under his very nose, but he threw aside his head with the modern equivalent of a word which a caveman might have used in some such plight. Adam was weakened into aggressive firmness. Eve offering a more tempting apple. "If you really loved me," tears emphasized the murmur. "Leah, darling." He was again in the toils, and kissing the bruised skin madly with feverish lips. "How could I be so cruel?" he mumbled, and slipped to her victorious feet. "Oh, oh, oh!" in three distinct keys. "Forgive." "If you will promise not to leave me," she whispered tenderly. "Never, never, never, never." A kiss on alternate hands for each word. Circe's magic having evoked the brute, she knew thoroughly the sort of animal she had to deal with. Considering that she had no feeling of love or even pity to create fervour, Leah acted admirably. Cooing like a mother over her babe, and with a seraphic look, she bent above the tame animal, less to caress him than to make sure that the halter was round his neck. "You foolish, hot-headed boy, do get up and talk sensibly." The subjugated obeyed meekly, all the fire out of his veins, and sat like a whipped schoolboy in a distant chair, which she indicated with regal indignation. "For," said Leah, as if she were announcing an entirely new fact, "I am a married woman," and she slipped behind the tea-table to prevent further demonstrations. "As if I didn't know," sighed Askew disconsolately. "Then why did you behave so badly, you wicked boy?" "Because jewellers' windows are tempting." "Jewellers' windows? You look into them and see pretty things you can't buy. Naturally, a fellow wants to smash the glass, and—" "I understand the parable, but a thief has to reckon with the law, and so has a married woman. You would not like to see her divorced, Harry?" "I would like to see you my wife," he retorted, evasively and stubbornly. "Impossible. I am already a wife. If I eloped with you, what respect could you have for me?" "I should have whatever you liked, including you." "Which I don't like and won't give," said Leah indignantly. "In you I look to find a friend, and I find nothing but ungoverned passion that would drag the object of his adoration in the mud. Oh, oh!" Out came the inevitable handkerchief. "How I have been deceived!" By this time the brute, with a penitent tail between his legs, was beginning to believe itself entirely in the wrong. Lady Jim, seeing this, became more than ever a tender woman. "I forgive you," she declared plaintively, from behind a handkerchief mopping dry eyes. "This scene will be as though it had never been." "But my feelings," rebelled the caveman sulkily, "will always be those of sacred friendship for a much-tried woman." "How can they be when you have made such a fool of yourself? Ah, my poor Harry, forget your folly. Remember only that I forgive you." "I don't exactly mean that," grumbled poor Harry, scenting sophistry, but unable to prevent the war being carried into his camp. "Well, you see, oh, hang it, Leah, you know that I love you." "Not with that true love which is at once tender and respectful." These sentiments were really noble, but somehow the bewildered man was not in the mood for copy book philosophy. "You offer me a stone and call it a beautiful loaf," said he, bitterly and with heat. "Another parable? How biblical you are becoming," said Lady Jim, desperately weary, and with her eye on the clock. "I do not understand, nor do you, my poor boy." "I understand that you have made a fool of me," he snapped brusquely. "Oh, no, nature has been beforehand there," she retorted, beginning to lose her temper with a man who would explain. "Don't be silly, Harry. Go home and think of our future." "Our future?" He leaped to his feet with a shining face. Leah regretted the misused pronoun and began to anticipate renewed melodrama, but her little tin god, pitying a votary whose nerves were jangled by stupid honesty, sent a seasonable visitor. "His Grace the Duke of Pentland," announced a grandiloquent footman, flinging wide the door. "Don't look so disgusted!" Leah flung an angry whisper in Askew's lowering face as she sailed forward to meet her father-in-law. "How are you, Duke? This is a surprise, a delightful one, of course. I never expected so pleasant a visitor." The room was tolerably dim, and the Duke had not the keen sight of his youth. Mr. hesitated his Grace. "Mr. Askew," chimed in Lady Jim, glad that the mask of twilight was on the younger man's very cross face. "He's just going. You know Mr. Askew, of course, Duke. I met him at Firmingham. Must you really go, Mr. Askew? So sorry. We may meet at Lady Quain's to night. I look in there for half an hour. Good bye for the present. So kind of you to see me home from Ranelagh. Very dull, wasn't it?" And rattling on to drown any too tender word he might let slip, she hustled him to the door. "Our future," breathed the inconvenient third, opening the gate of paradise most reluctantly. "Even the brutes have instincts, if not sense," snapped Lady Jim, scathingly, and Adam, without Eve, took his solitary way down the stairs, to be dismissed into a cheerless world by an indifferent footman. To prevent interruption, Leah closed the door herself and switched on the electrics before she returned to her untimely visitor. "Will you be long, Duke?" she asked, again consulting the clock. "I have to dress for dinner. Mrs. Martin's, you know. A stupid woman with a bad cook. Such a bore." "I wonder you care to see people when Jim's away," said Pentland, fretfully, and she noted suddenly his aged looks. Lady Jim felt inclined to retort with the proverb of the absent cat and the jubilant mice, but she really felt sorry for the old man's drooping mouth and additional wrinkles. "I won't see any one, if you like, Duke. I'm sure it's no pleasure to make conversation without ideas. Do let me ring for hot tea. You look so tired. Sit down in this chair, and the cushion there." She made him comfortable with genuine womanly sympathy, wondering meanwhile what was ageing him. "No tea, my dear. I can only wait for a few minutes. My carriage is below. Tired? Yes, I am very tired. Worried also." "Nothing wrong, I hope," murmured Leah, sympathetically. "Jim, my dear, poor Jim. Have you heard about his health lately?" "Oh, yes. Last week I received a few lines, and he said that he felt ever so much better. His cough is almost gone." "Ah," said Pentland, sadly, "like all consumptives, he is too hopeful." Leah became nervous and anxious. Had Jim been obliterated at last? "What is it?" she demanded irritably. Is he Her tongue could not form the lying word. "Worse. Yes, much worse," said the Duke, rubbing his forehead and producing a letter. "This is from Demetrius. We may expect Oh, my poor son," and he almost broke down. "I don't trust these doctors," remarked Lady Jim, skimming the letter with a feeling that Demetrius was really too imaginative. "They always shout wolf when the animal is miles away. Don't worry." "But you see, Demetrius says that poor Jim may go off at any moment, and Demetrius is a clever man. He may be mistaken. I've heard of surprising recoveries." Pentland shook his head and groaned. "Not Jim. I had a conviction that I should never see him again when we parted in this very room." "It's absurd," argued Leah, artfully. "Jim was quite well till he caught that stupid cold at Firmingham. Why should he go off suddenly? What they call galloping consumption is I can't believe it. Nothing would surprise me more than to hear of Jim's death," and she soothed her conscience with the reflection that this speech was perfectly true, considering Jim had the strength of a bull and the appetite of a shark. "If I lose him " "You won't lose him. I'll send a cable to Demetrius, and if Jim is really so sick, I'll go out and nurse him." Pentland's face lighted up, and he pressed her hand. "How good of you, my dear! It will ease my mind. But," he hesitated, "I never thought you cared enough about Jim to inconvenience yourself." "Jim has given me very little reason to care for him," said Leah, with some bitterness. "If he had been a better husband, I should have been a different woman." She used the stale argument tactfully and regretfully. "Yes, sir, I'm afraid that's true," said the Duke, recalling his son's peccability. "But he is so ill. Forgive and forget, Leah." "For your sake, if not for Jim's," she said gracefully. "I'll send the cable this very night." And she did. When Pentland, overflowing with outspoken approbation of her correct conduct, took his leave, she went to her desk and hunted out a cipher with which Demetrius had supplied her. It would not do to let the postal authorities know of their schemes, and the cipher was a particularly intricate one. Leah spent an hour in concocting her cablegram, and was late for dinner in consequence, but she had a good appetite all the same, in spite of the bad food and the dull conversation. For on their way to Kingston, Jamaica, were a few lines in cipher, a translation of which would have been of great interest to the father-in-law, who thought her so womanly and good. "Duke wants me to nurse Jim," ran the cipher, when Demetrius used the key. "Wire that there is no need." If Jim had really been dying, she would not have altered a single word. CHAPTER 18. Of Lady Jim of Curzon Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lady Jim of Curzon Street by Fergus Hume. Chapter 18. An urchin throws a stone into the horse pond. Circles form not only in the still water, but in the fluent air, to enring invisibly our sphere. And who can say to what limit they recede, if limit there be? So with a carelessly selected, hastily flung word. Had Lady Jim said "your future," Askew, assuming no coupling, would have grumbled himself back into tame catism and canine contentment with casual head-pats. But our future, the pronoun bulked portentous, its three letters encompassed, to the lover's prolific imagination, divorce, remarriage, a lifelong duet, and amorous communings in the highest paradise attainable by those yet moving in time. Lady Jim, less philological, gave him to understand that a single word could by no means embrace such various interpretations. She again emphasized her matronhood, called Askew's attention to the spotless reputation he wished to smirch, and intimated that poor Jim's illness precluded her from thinking of anything save poor Jim's possible decease, in which sad case, mourned Leah, we could renew our conversation without reproach. "A widow has no bridesmaids, I believe," hinted Askew, reflectively. She hinted back with sweet smiles, "Don't you prefer a quiet wedding?" And on this adjustment of the situation he built castles, believing the foundation to be sound. Strangely enough, in so honest a gentleman, the heartlessness of utilizing possibilities connected with the Kaimes vault never occurred to him, which proved, without need of words, the essential selfishness of the feeling he miscalled love. On this arrangement Lady Jim frolicked gaily through the remaining weeks of the season, well content that things were as they were. A Jamaica cablegram, which, It designedly not being in cipher, she could and did show to the Duke, informed both that a wifely nurse was needless. The last word of the communication promised a letter, which duly arrived. This last also was a public document, Demetrius being too cunning to detail criminality in black and white. Pentland and Leah read the letter cheek by jowl. Lord James was a trifle better, said the script, and if able to outlast the voyage, would return to England en route for Algiers. Lady James could then nurse him into health, say at Biskra. "Thank heaven!" quavered the Duke, not reading between the lines, as did his better informed daughter-in-law. "We'll make a party and go there for the autumn. Frith will be delighted." "On Jim's account?" inquired Leah, dryly. "Rather an effort, Duke." "On my account," rebuked the old man. "Frith knows that if Jim is to leave us," his voice faltered and fell, "I should like to see him depart." "Why does the prodigal son always banquet on the calf?" mused Lady Jim, restoring the letter to her pocket. "My dear, many failings require many excuses." "So it seems. Selfish people receive more praise for one creditable action than do those kind-hearted fools who spend their lives in self-denial." "We must encourage the good seed to grow, my dear." She laughed unpleasantly. "It usually springs up wild oats with over-attention." And she departed to consider the inexplicable growth of green bay-trees. Lord Frith had never given his father the slightest trouble. He was a model son, an admirable husband. His friendships were staunch and his life clean. Yet Pentland contented himself with perfunctory praise of these qualities. He expected his eldest son to be a domestic Bayard, as the unimaginative Marquis had shown no desire to sow the wind. Jim, on the other hand, left the reaping of his whirlwind to doting relatives. Devourer of husks with congenial swine, and caring only for his large, healthy, greedy self, he had never done a kind act or shown a filial trait. A spendthrift, a rogue in grain, cursed by many men, blessed by no woman, he, this profligate egotist, was dealt with not only tenderly, but in a way calculated to assure him that he was a pearl without price. His notorious failings were covered by the phrase that he was his own worst enemy, and the presumed possession of good qualities, never manifested, entitled him to paternal pity. Leah, an easy-going sinner herself, was not hard on those who dwelt in glass houses, but this gilding of Jim's base metal made her gorge rise. "What's the use of being good?" she moralised, as her brougham sped towards Curzon Street. "Kindness is looked upon as weakness, and the more generous one is, the more those who don't know the meaning of the word sponge and sneer. If you are really bad, sham philanthropists reclaim you and cocker you up, and praise you loudly if you say hang instead of damn. A sinner repents, and heaven is aflutter. A saint makes one slip, and the world yells hypocrite. A pied person, neither white nor black, is left alone, as the majority are of that mottled complexion. To be really good is to be hated. To be extremely bad means excuses, help, and trumpetings. Frith gets the kicks without deserving them, and Jim the halfpence he has never earned. clever Jim, who has chosen the world's better part." It will be seen that Leah, being of the world, judged as the world, and yet with greater discernment. In one way she was right. It is generally your sinner who gobbles up the cakes and ale, but Lady Jim, no very ardent Bible student, misread texts, or rather read her own material meaning into them. Therefore, although conversant with green bay trees, did she not dwell in a grove of such? Her memory did not recall the axe that might be laid to the roots thereof. The 73rd Psalm might also have assisted her to a better understanding of undeserved worldly prosperity, had she done other than gobble it hastily when it happened to come into the service. But the fetish, which stood to her in place of the living God, did not encourage spiritual explorations, and Leah saw life as a comprehensible stretch of time, limited by birth or death. The hereafter, if any, she could not conceive, knowing only the present as the real, the actual, and the true. Therefore did she grudge Jim his undeserved coddlings. Had he lain on a bed of his own making, it would have been justice, strict justice. But that fools should prepare him a feather mattress and downy pillow seemed, and really was, intolerable. Thinking of the Duke's wasted and misplaced affection, Leah plucked the fruit of her tree of knowledge. "Good people need missionaries," said Lady Jim. However, as Jim and she had occupied separate rooms for many a long day, his feather bedism troubled her little. Also, Askew had been brought to heel by the promise of future bones. The plot was being rounded off in far Jamaica without her aid, and what with Sir Billy's winnings and a moderate cheque cajoled out of the Duke, she had enough to keep the wolf from the Curzon Street door. On the whole, things could not be improved, and it only remained to exercise patience. But of this virtue Leah possessed little, and did not care to expend what she had in twiddling her thumbs at home. Jim was away, so she could play, and did. A masked ball at Covent Garden amused her immensely. The plays condemned by Sir Billy found in her a lenient critic, and now that Pentland had paid off old bills, she ran up new ones with the zest of a woman who required nothing. Also, she went to Epsom and pulled off a decent sum on a tip breathed into her ear by the racing baronet, whom she had snubbed into slangy admiration. To Hurlingham and Richmond she raced a split new motor car of the latest pattern, and exhibited her nerve and skill in the Park. Charity bazaars, Savoy dinners, bridge parties, Sunday river excursions, and such like time-killers beheld her in varied and tasteful frocks, and she also dined with those friends upon whose cook she could rely. Altogether, she enjoyed the life of a busy idler, and had that remarkably agreeable time which magnificent health, comparative wealth, and a conscience of no importance would give to such a woman. But her head duly governed her frivolities, and she made no plans for the Cowes week, although she knew a manageable man with a delightful yacht. The daily expected decease of Jim had to be considered, and thoughtful Leah had already designed her mourning. Meanwhile, she babbled of Biskra to Lady Canvey, and rather overdid it. "Are you and Jim going on a second honeymoon?" inquired that suspicious old dame. "We are," replied Leah, calmly. "How clever of you to guess it." "Humph! The poor wretch must be worse than I thought." "I see. My affection, to your mind, is too obvious." "The non-existent can never manifest itself," said Lady Canvey, in scientific English. "Either a miracle has happened to give you a heart, or Jim is dying, and you are getting ready to dance on his grave." Leah coloured with suppressed anger. This plain speaking annoyed her, and she disliked people who peeped behind the scenes. "Jim and I are not angels, godmother," she said with dignity, "but we're pals enough to make me regret his death. My mourning, though you may doubt it, will be perfectly sincere." Lady Canvey gave a dry laugh. "See Carlyle on the philosophy of clothes. Well, I shan't pay your bill at Jay's." "Thanks, I don't ask you to. The total might involve a larger cheque than you would care to sign." "I'm sure of that, my dear, seeing your mourning is to be perfectly sincere." The impracticable old woman and her goddaughter were alone, else this snapping might not have occurred. Leah had rather neglected Lady Canvey of late, because that astute octogenarian had locked up her cheque book. But on her way to an "At Home" she had looked in for a few moments, and sat in the stuffy Victorian room, radiant in a crape ninon frock of Parma violet, elaborately flounced, and with a fichu and short sleeves. The dress was simple enough, and she wore little jewellery, but her dazzling neck and shoulders and arms, her glorious hair and calm, strong face would have made her noticeable even in a crowd of picked beauties. Lady Canvey, whose ill humour was mostly surface crabbedness, for she preferred losing a friend to withholding an epigram, could not refrain from grudging compliments. But between women these rang hollow. "You look charming to night, my dear." "After the storm the sunshine," said Lady Jim, smiling at such novel civility. "Well, I appreciate the change. Whatever my faults may be, godmother, you cannot say that I am disagreeable. I always call, in spite of your what shall we say?" "Home truths." "And you call when it suits you. Humph! Perhaps I am a trifle short-tempered." "A trifle! Old age has its privileges," Lady Canvey reminded her, "and you can be so cleverly nasty when you like, that it amuses me to bring the worst out of you." "What a doubtful compliment! Do you extract amusement from the Tallentire girl in the same way?" "She has no bad in her." "Quite so. And you never try to bring out the good, which does not amuse you. Sunday schools are beneficial rather than entertaining. I don't see Miss what's her name?" and Lady Jim glanced round the room. "Joan Tallentire," snapped her hostess. "You remember the name well enough. It's fashionable to have a short memory, I suppose." "For debts," said Leah, sweetly. "But Miss Tallentire?" "She is looking after her father's house, as the mother is ill." "Poor woman! I hope Lionel is not preaching at her to make her worse." "Lionel isn't always in the pulpit. By the way, Leah, he told me that he had a serious talk with you at Firmingham." "Did he?" "Yes, I believe he did give me a dull quarter of an hour. Something about sin, I fancy it was. Parsons have a monomania on that subject." Lady Canvey made an angry noise in her wrinkled throat. "You're impossible," she pronounced tartly. "Lionel wishes to improve you." "What about Jim?" "Charity should commence with his own family." "Well, my dear, Lionel admires you, and " "Oh, he is a man, then. I don't think I ever made running with a clergyman. It might be rather fun. I suppose Lionel would recite the Song of Solomon to me. There's lots of love talk in it, not very proper talk either, I'm told. Perhaps Solomon wrote it for married women. He had some experience of them, hadn't he? He collected concubines, didn't he? Just like a stamp maniac. Leah, you are insufferable and impossible." She rose to go and arranged the fur-lined Medici collar of her evening wrap in the dim mirror. "But I'm about to be punished for my sins. The Duke made me promise to go to this at home. Mrs. Saracen, you know, she's one of the submerged upper ten, or she married one of them, I forget which, though I know she has something to do with a pickle or a sauce. Very amusing old thing, too. She gives you a nutshell biography of every one before she introduces." "What on earth for?" "Oh, so that you may be warned against people's skeletons. Mrs. Saracen points out the cupboard and tells you not to open it, and of course you do." Lady Canvey chuckled. "Rather clever. And her friends?" "Male and female, I believe. She collects people who have done something." "In the criminal way?" "She would if the law allowed them out of jail, but at present she contents herself with freaks. I don't go to middle-class menageries as a rule, but at the Duke's request I patronize this one." "Come to-morrow and tell me all about it." "If you'll promise to be nice." Her godmother was silent for a moment. "Leah, my dear," she said at length, taking the gloved hand, "I am sorry we always quarrel when we meet. I really have a corner in my heart for you, and if you were only less Lady Canvey hunted for the right word, less exasperating, we should get on excellently." Lady Jim nodded, squeezed the bony hands, and kissed the wrinkled cheek. "Let us make a fresh start," she said gently, for she really felt sorry. "I'll come every day while Miss Tallentire is absent, and tell you the news." "That's a good girl. Good night. Enjoy yourself, my dear." And the two parted better friends than they had been for months. On her way to Mrs. Saracen, who lived in the wilds of Kensington, Leah saw herself in the new character of a dry nurse to a spiteful old harridan, and wondered at her good nature. Why should she bore herself with a spent octogenarian whose sole attraction was the possession of money, with which she declined to part? Yet Lady Jim had promised daily visits to this ruin, and, what is more, for no reason discoverable to herself, intended to keep her promise, even though there was nothing to be gained by such self-denial. The idea that she, of all people, should do something for nothing tickled her greatly, and the street lamps swinging past the brougham flashed on an amused face. She was so pleased with discovering virtue in such an unexpected quarter that she quite forgot to look mournful when her hostess inquired after Jim's health. The waist upon which the Honourable Mrs. Saracen had prided herself somewhere about the middle of the 19th century was now a matter of guesswork. Her stoutness impressed even the unobservant with the conviction that she had eaten her way through life and was at present engaged in digging a not far off grave with her teeth. And for her age she had an astonishingly good set, obtrusively genuine. Her general appearance was in keeping, for she wore her own white hair in smooth bands under a Waterloo turban, fearfully and wonderfully made, and presented a natural face of winter apple rosiness, scored with good-humoured wrinkles. As nature had made her, and time had aged her, so she was, growing old healthily, if not gracefully. In an alarming dress, many-coloured as Joseph's coat, she wheezed like a plethoric poodle, and rolled in a nautical manner by reason of her bulk. Who would have guessed at a brain hidden in this ponderous mass of adipose? Yet she was a self-made woman who had acquired a large fortune by the sale of Saracen's sauce. Therefore did current gossip accuse her of beginning life as a cook. A perfect invention, this, as she was a gentlewoman who had intellectually married beneath her, that is, she had bought with the sauce money a scampish aristocrat of the Jim Kames type, only less manly. He had long since drank himself into the family vault, and had left his wife with one son, who was now in the army. Everyone liked Mrs. Saracen, in spite of her eccentricities and love of glaring colours, and many a society pauper had reason to thank her for timely help. And to cap her good qualities, she professed open pride in the sauce, which appeared on every middle-class dinner-table throughout the three kingdoms. "Dear Lady James," she wheezed, wagging two fat hands like a seal its flappers, "how good of you to come. You will find some interesting people here." She looked round with pride at the collection of lions, old and young, tame and wild, fat and lean, sham and real. "Now, Mr. Wallace here, let me present him. Charming man, very outspoken, great traveller, Zambesi, knows cannibals intimately." Then, behind a plump hand, whispered a nutshell biography. "Don't mention his wife. Divorce." Thus warned, Leah got on excellently with the lean, brown, keen-eyed man, who confessed to extensive explorations. "Cannibals? Yes, Lady James, I know a few, and love them." "What strange affection, Mr. Wallace. Why?" "They ate a man I detested." "I fear he disagreed with them in death, as he always disagreed with me in life." Lady Jim laughed. "Is there any one here you would like to make a side dish of?" she asked, letting her eyes rove. "No, I am a complete stranger in London. It is the one place I have not explored. But Mrs. Saracen has told me the past of many here, and I can give you histories if you like." "Go on, then. Only don't give me dates, else the women here might scratch." "I don't know these creatures myself," she went on, with the calm insolence of a great lady. "To me they are like your Central African natives." "I agree, Lady James, only less civilized." "In what way?" "Niggers wear no clothes, and therefore are more modest." "I can quite imagine it. That thin lady over there is evidently of your opinion." And Leah glanced at a mature damsel who wore just sufficient clothing to prevent interference by the police. "Miss Fastine. She's a naturopath, and is trying to revert to primitive simplicity." "With such a figure she might stop short of the Garden of Eden," said Lady Jim dryly. "I never heard of a naturopath. What is it?" "An American sect which needs solitude to carry out its theories. The members sleep in the open, cover themselves with earth when they feel sick, and advocate the altogether." "You are joking, Mr. Wallace." The traveller stifled a laugh. "Upon my word, Lady James, I am in earnest. The sect really does exist. That stout man talking to Mrs. Saracen belongs to another queer lot. Calls himself an osteopath." "What on earth is that?" "One who cures by vitalising the nerves." "I am as wise as I was before. Any more freaks?" "Yonder is a Christian Scientist, and the man on the left advocates Mohammedanism as the state religion in England. While the dressmakers charge so ruinously, he'll never induce men to take 4 wives." "And the woman in the red dress?" "Lady Tansey. a believer in spirits." "So I should imagine," said Lady Jim, surveying the lady's nose, which was long and thin, and the hue of her gown. "No, no, I talk of heavenly spirits. Lady Tansey has a large circle of departed friends, who rap." "What a bore! As if one didn't get enough of friends in this world, without worrying them to knock out bad grammar from the next. Really, Mr. Wallace, I begin to think Mrs. Saracen must keep a lunatic asylum." "Oh dear, no," he answered, chuckling. "It is the sane people that are usually shut up." "Certainly not the disagreeable people," retorted Lady Jim. "Oh, if you go to those lengths, there would be no society," said Wallace, with a shrug. The traveller's cynicism exactly suited Leah's humour at the moment, and she made him take her in to supper. Meanwhile, Askew, who had not seen Lady Jim arrive, was watching the grand entrance with a lowering face. He had called at Curzon Street, and thence had borne a message for Leah, which he was anxious to deliver. Already he had been bored to distraction with faddists and their whims, and was seriously thinking of slipping away, when Mrs. Saracen bore down on him for the fourth time. Before he could object, she had him by the arm and confronted him with a severe-looking woman, pensive and solitary. "Do let me introduce you to Miss Galway," she wheezed. "You'll get on so well with Mr. Askew, dear Miss Galway. He's Navy, you know, or has been. Left it going to be married. And Mr. Askew, if you can talk of Phoenician inscriptions to Miss Galway, she'll entertain you for hours. Quite an authority on Solomon, I believe. Very clever, most intellectual." Then aside hastily, "Say nothing about her brother. Jail." Poor Askew! Miss Galway proved to be a limpet, and held on to him desperately, not because he was handsome, but for the sake of the 2 ears he possessed, into which she could pour her archaeological triumphs. She prosed in a manly voice about Hiram of Tyre, and the building of Solomon's temple, and the probability that its design was copied from the shrine of Moloch, and the remains that Zerubbabel must have found after the Babylonian captivity, until his poor head buzzed like a saw mill. In the hope of stopping this endless trickle of nothings, he cajoled her to the supper room. There, at a small table well covered, Lady Jim ate and drank and chatted light-heartedly with a sharp-eyed, sun-dried mummy. She nodded a "How do you do?" to her sailor, and smilingly observed his entanglement. Luckily for the preservation of Askew's temper, a rival archaeologist arrived to discuss Hittite grammar, and he managed to slip away while the male and female dryadusts wrangled over the probable origin of the parasites. "You haven't been near me all the evening," complained Leah, when Wallace received his congé, and Askew sat in the seat of the scornful. "Didn't see you arrive. Worse luck. If you'd been dosed with Hivites and Jebusites and all that truck as I've been, you'd have a headache too." "It's unusual for you to have a headache." "And inevitable for me to have a heartache." "On account of that alphabet woman, I suppose. Why don't you feed?" "No appetite. But if you'll come along to the Cecil." "Certainly not. We've been there much too often of late. People will talk." "Let them. What does it matter?" "Everything matters when people have tongues and eyes and envious natures. Don't be silly. I promised the Duke to stop here for half an hour, and, after all, it's amusing. I never knew such people existed outside Punch." "Well, what now?" This, because, with sudden recollection of an oversight, He brought out an envelope. "This was waiting at Curzon Street," he explained, handing it across, "and the butler, thinking it might be important, asked me to Why, what's the matter, Leah?" It was his turn to inquire, for, reading while he talked, she had suddenly whitened. "Don't call me Leah," she snapped, with the irritation of a shaken woman, then reread the cablegram again and again. "What is it? What is it? My husband is dead." She crushed the paper into a ball, rose to go, and dropped back, overwhelmingly faint. "Oh!" she moaned faintly. For once in her life of shams and sneering and playing with other world fires, she was moved to genuine emotion. CHAPTER XIX.